Welcome to this explainer. Now, I should probably warn you right up front, I won't be greeting you today with that boundless enthusiasm you might be used to. There's honestly no joy to be found in the task we have before us. I speak to you today as an ancient, weary auditor of the cosmos. For countless eons, I've cataloged the pride, the folly, and, well, the inevitable decay of mortal ambition. Today, we're going to open a very specific text. We're looking into the archetype of the Faustbuch. It's a tale of dark, grim fantasy. So, let's just open the ledger, shall we? And let's examine the absolute, true nature of cosmic indifference.
In our parable, there was this great architect. You know the type, a man who actually believed his intellect could pierce the very heavens. One evening, he stood before a massive mirror in his study, completely expecting to see his own sheer brilliance reflected right back at him. But instead, the glass reflected only the endless yawning void of the abyss. When I finally appeared to him, I didn't arrive in some big theatrical burst of hellfire. No, I appeared merely as a shadow cast by a light that had long since ceased to exist. I was just that creeping dark in the corner of his eye.
Naturally, I brought along the tools of my trade. I held this incredibly heavy ledger. It was bound in skin, carrying the faint, unmistakable scent of old, dry parchment and cooling iron. It's the sterile smell of the inevitable, really. The architect, trembling but still clinging to his arrogance, demanded to know the secret of the stars. He genuinely believed he was owed the universe's greatest mysteries. I didn't argue. I simply raised a long, pale finger and pointed toward a single, distant ember in the night sky that was already fading into absolute nothingness. I whispered to him that I was the silence following the word, the empty, totally uncaring space between those fading stars.
Section 1. The Soul-Crushing Facts.
As I moved through those grand halls the architect had built just to honor his own ego, I felt like a winter draft. You know that kind of cold, a coldness that just bypasses the flesh entirely and chills the very marrow of your bones. Now, mortal tales often like to flatter humanity by suggesting the devil has to try exceptionally hard to win a soul. They talk about grand temptations like mountains of gold, or the intoxicating pull of lust, or the promise of unlimited earthly power. But honestly, I offered absolutely none of those things, because temptation implies that the mortal's desires actually matter. Instead, I brought only absolute sterile facts. I simply spoke the raw truth of his cosmic insignificance. And with every single truth I spoke, another layer of his desperate hope was stripped away. I was merely a clerk, meticulously recording his sins in my ledger, using a pen fashioned from the feather of a fallen angel.
I took a good look at his life's work. His magnificent towers, his vast, sprawling libraries, his absolute certainty that his name would echo through eternity. And then I delivered a very simple assessment. I told him, your legacy is but a footprint in a desert that has never known the rain. It was a sneering, brutal realization of his ultimate, pathetic insignificance in the grand cosmic scheme of things. His pride wasn't a mountain at all. It was just a tiny speck of dust waiting for the wind to blow it away.
Which brings us to Section 2. The Stone Seal.
We move now to the completely inevitable conclusion of all audits like this. It's the exact moment where the sheer, suffocating wake of absolute truth finally shatters a mortal's weary heart. The scene is pathetic, really. The great architect just fell to his knees. He wept openly. He begged for mercy, his tears pooling right there on the polished marble floor of his beautiful study. But how exactly can a ledger show mercy? How can gravity possibly feel pity for a falling stone? As he sobbed, I merely adjusted the heavy spectacles upon my translucent nose. I felt absolutely nothing for his tears. There was no sadistic joy in my eyes, no triumph, just the dull, bureaucratic satisfaction of a long-standing debt finally coming due.
I just pointed a bony finger right at the blood-red mark upon his contract. I patiently explained to him that the ink had already solidified. It had actually turned to unyielding stone. The terrifying permanence of his prideful promise had fully materialized. He really believed he was making this grand, sweeping bargain to become a god, but in reality, he had merely constructed an inescapable cage with his own 2 hands.
I looked down at him, this trembling heap of ruined ambition, and I pronounced the final expiration of his account. I said, "Justice is a clock that never loses a second, and your time has finally expired." I didn't say it with malice, I didn't say it with anger. It was simply a statement of a universal constant. The pendulum swings, you see, and eventually it stops.
Section 3. Coffin of the Underworld.
And so we reached the final stage of the collection. The fragile illusion of the mortal world finally gave way to reality. The solid stone walls of his magnificent study just began to dissolve, bleeding away into the gray, endless mists of the eternal underworld. Now, I didn't reach out to grab him. I didn't summon a horde of demons with pitchforks to drag him screaming down into the fire. Honestly, such efforts are entirely unnecessary. As my shadow grew and grew to consume the room, I simply stood aside, and the floor beneath the architect just vanished. He plummeted straight into the dark. I remained behind, breathing in that sharp, metallic scent of ozone, just listening to the faint, pathetic echo of his final sigh.
The audit was officially complete. The ledger closed. It made a heavy, final sound, kind of like a thick wooden coffin lid snapping shut in an utterly silent tomb. And then I vanished into the dark. You see, the architect realized far, far too late the true horror of his situation. The devil's greatest weapon against humanity was never actually the burning fires of damnation. No, it was total, unyielding, cosmic indifference.
Moving on to Section 4, Evolution of the Devil. So, let's pivot this explainer for a moment. We'll move from the recounting of one man's personal doom to a cold, analytical audit of human literature itself. We really need to examine how humanity has tried to cope with the entity I just described to you. How exactly does the ancient, deeply indifferent nature of the Faustbusch compare to the much more manipulative wit seen in later versions of the character? Over the centuries, humanity has desperately attempted to reshape the image of cosmic terror. I suppose you tell yourself stories to make the dark feel a little less empty, don't you?
On the one hand, you have the early Faustbach Mephistopheles, the exact persona I've been presenting to you today, a cold, incredibly weary cosmic clerk, an entity of sterile indifference who deals only in hard facts. But then, on the other hand, you have those later depictions, most famously the one crafted by Goethe. His Mephistopheles is witty, he's charming, he actively manipulates, he jokes, and he schemes. But I want you to ask yourself, why did humanity bother to invent a charming devil? Well, it's quite simple. Because a devil who manipulates you is a devil who actually cares what you do. A devil who tempts you is a devil who acknowledges your worth. Goethe's devil makes humanity feel important. The Faustbach devil, however, he just reminds you that you are absolutely nothing to the void.
And so, as I prepare to close the ledger on today's explainer, I'm going to leave you with one final, lingering thought. As you go about your life, constantly building your own little towers, chasing your own fading embers, whose footprint are you leaving in a desert that has never known rain? Take some time to contemplate your legacies against the endless void, because your audit eventually will come due. Until then.